Hello, I'm Tim McHenry. At the Rubin Museum of Art, we have the privilege of sharing ideas and art from the Himalayas with the world. This art can guide us on how we can explore our inner world to help us better navigate the outer one. And in this on-stage Brainwave program, filmed on October the 28th, 2022, we looked at what the concept of envy means. The Vairochana Mandala teachings aim to assist us in recognizing how to translate the disruptive and competitive energies generated by feelings of jealousy and envy into the wisdom of collaborative accomplishment, which can foster collective growth. The New York Times recently hailed Janeane Garofalo as one of the most consequential comedians of the past half-century. On stage at the Rubin Museum in New York, she met for the first time Dr. Kevin Ochsner from Columbia University's Emotions Lab. And together they talked about envy, jealousy, and the emotions that seek to separate us from ourselves.
So you had asked me, sorry, I'm so sorry. You had asked me an example of envy or jealousy.
Yeah, what do you think of when you think of these emotions? A specific example?
When I think of them, I guess at their most basic is, as is part of the human condition, it's can be natural and normal for people to feel that when they see others maybe who have something that they don't. But in many cases, it can be quite benign. You know, you're like, oh, I see that person has that. Or even, and this is going to seem very shallow, like physical beauty. You can say, oh my gosh, that person, if only, or if only I was the age of my back pain, 37. I could go back to just 37.
That's when it started?
37 years ago. I had my back for 37 years because I refused to strengthen my core. But be that as it may, I have often thought that, like, oh, to be 37 again. And I envy sometimes youth sometimes, or just great apartments. So honestly, when I walk the dogs at night, I'll look in windows, and I always wish I lived, I think it's 43 Fifth Avenue, there's a building. Oh, I envy and covet, but I don't begrudge them. I'm not mad at them for living in there. I'm happy for them for living there. So I see it in that way, like I wish I had. A lot of times I wish I was a different kind of person. I wish I had worked harder and could have that apartment or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Have you noticed the things that you think of in this way have changed as you've, I don't want to say gotten older, but as you've moved through life? As
I'm approaching life's third chapter, there's a special about it on PBS.
How many chapters are there?
Well, according to Dr. Wayne Dyer, 3. Because I'm almost 60, and he's 60 and above. He said life gets better. I don't know if that's true, but I like the sentiment. So I'm going to go with the 3 chapters. Maybe there's 5. I don't know how many. What did you ask me? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry.
I asked if you've noticed things that might bring up the sense of envy in you. Have they changed as from when you were in your 20s up until now? Sure.
And also when I have these feelings, like I said many times, it is not that I want to do anything like I said, I don't begrudge these people. I'm happy that they have these things. I have let go of the concerns and things that a younger person would have. Sexuality, that frees up your. I have no interest whatsoever in the world of erotica or like sex after 50. That is in no way, and I have no need to be attractive or to the opposite or curry favor with that kind of thing is gone. But there are things, like I said, the nice, like bookshelves with a rolling ladder.
Oh, yeah.
Like I see that in the windows, and I'm like, oh, the high ceilings. And I think about that, and I wish, that kind of thing. But I talk myself through these things sometimes when it can be disruptive when it comes to one's vocation. Like, oh, I wanted that part, or I wanted that Netflix special, whatever. I talk myself through it. Like, okay, so you didn't get it, and that it is what it is. Nobody forces you to do this for a living. It's elective. so you really can't complain about that. And I do automatic writing sometimes about it to get it out of my system.
And is that how you felt about it when you first started? I mean, it's not escaped any of us that you're very famous.
No, not anymore. I mean, the 90s were good. And I'm not saying that in a like poor me way. I'm saying I got this incredible amount of luck in the 90s. Incredibly lucky. And then it dipped. And I didn't really move toward action. I'm not like what you call a real go-getter. I live every day like it's my first. I guess is I take it easy. I take it too easy, unfortunately.
There's certainly a stereotype that there can be conflicts between people, where somebody's envious of another person getting a role or a part, and so on. And I wonder, in the context of what you're saying, your description is really lovely. You're focusing on yourself and how you felt sad about it, but you're not talking about a comparison to other people.
I guess it is, although I guess inherently that compares to other people. But like I said, growing up, I got lucky. I was neither bullied nor popular. I was in that sweet spot of, you'd be hard pressed, I think, to find people that remembered going to school with me. You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just, which is a nice place to be. Like I said, you don't get picked on, and you're not super popular. And then, if you do experience some type of acceptance and popularity, accidentally, or you just get lucky, it feels really nice. It's like, that's weird. It's unusual. And then it goes away, unless you have the protection of sustained career success that like 0.5% of SAG-AFTRA has. Like those people that are household names that it just goes on and on and on. And that's life. And oddly, the stereotype of people in entertainment being different than it's unusual to me, because it's just people that happen to be doing that. And I'm sure no matter what job you have, there is the case of, I wish I had that job, or I wish I could do. It's just part of the human condition, I think. It's just that some businesses are more public than others.
Yeah. So what do you think, so turning sort of back to where we started with envy, do you think that plays a role for people in your profession or any profession in terms of keeping them going, keeping them engaged, do you see that as a prime motivator? Have you seen people in your industry, for example?
I don't know if it's envy. There are some people that I think, and this is not a criticism of those people, I don't know them. Jennifer Lopez, she's not quitting. She's not going to stop. You know what I mean? Like, she does what it takes. Branches out to business, or Madonna, where it becomes a thing where you're like, oh. And I feel that's a different issue. She is it's not drugs, alcohol, anything like that. She seems to need to be seen still, and will go to lives very publicly, or those that live where everything's documented, everything is posted.
Yeah.
Online, people live very publicly. I feel the more you put yourself out there, the more you give people a reason to dislike you, because everyone's a critic. And also, all this technology stuff didn't kick in until I was a middle-aged lady. It's not natural for me. I don't have social media platforms, that kind of thing. And I think that to me, I don't know, I'm speculating, shows a fear of dipping even a little bit in the consciousness. And it must be exhausting. And also I think about, I don't know if this is related, how hard it must be, and this is again, transcends gender, for someone whose part of their currency was physical beauty. How hard it must be to, and I think Madonna is suffering from some of that, because I feel plastic surgery is like a game at 21. Just hold at 17. Don't say hit me again. That's where it goes wrong. Because sometimes people get certain things done and they're looking pretty good at and they should say to the dealer, that's it. And then when they say hit me again, that's where you go, oh, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
But I have empathy and sympathy. That must be very, very difficult.
envy is this sense that in a social comparison, someone has something I don't want. When we think about empathy, it's about, there's sort of three pieces to empathy, at least the way I think about it, three facets to it. One is being able to cognitively understand, so I could just describe in words. What is it that I think you're feeling right now? There's a motivational piece. If you're suffering, am I motivated to help you? It's like a pro-social component in it. And then there's the emotional component, that synchrony, that sense that I'm going on an emotional ride with you. You may have empathy alongside envy, especially if it's a benign form, but they're distinct kinds of emotional states. And I think in some cases, empathy is the antidote to envy, right? It seems like you have a tremendous amount of empathy for a lot of the people you've worked with and others, where that might have been, maybe that's partly what comes from having a tremendous amount of parental love. But being able to accept and feel what other people are feeling. Let them have their joy without it reflecting negatively on yourself, right? So if we could do that in situations where envy might otherwise lead to some malicious or hostile behavior, you might be able to defang it. You know, when you think about jealousy or envy from the perspective of a theorist, like what are these emotions and why do we have them? They're really about the difference between you and what you have and what someone else has. So jealousy is about interpersonal relationships, at least when you're trying to parse them apart. Somebody has a relationship that I might want to have, or I'm jealous of them getting in between me and someone I have a relationship with. Envy is about objects, attainment, but it's the same kind of emotion. It's like a triangle. It's an emotion triangle with two people and either a third person or something else. And it seems to be present in infants. It's there in dogs and cats. If you come to our house, you'll see our dog and our cat very jealous of my wife's attention. Yeah. One will come up and nudge the other away. Yeah. They'll hiss at each other. I don't know if our daughter is still here, but our kids, when they were just very little, you see the sibling rivalry. Right? It's natural. It's like the loss of the resource you got, the love and affection from the parent, right? And then you think, as people get older, what function is jealousy and envy serving for them, right? Like, it's about status. It's about these celebrities. They want to be envied. They were used to being envied and having high status, and in comparison to their peers, I'm just trying to understand, what's the motivation to keep going, right? They move up, and like, you're already at the top. Where else is there to go?
Well, for those that want to stay at the top, because it hurts a great deal to not be there. I never achieved the status of like what I'm talking about, like the hugely famous. So I don't know what that kind of descent is like, if there is a descent. But I think it's just humans, that's people. But I think more importantly, more destructively, is where you see it in the political process. Because actors, they don't impact your life. Where it's problematic is when there is adults, and you all know who I'm referring to, whether it be the armed poll watchers now, the right-wingers. This is a very highly destructive form of ingratitude or possibly jealousy or envy, but this idea that somehow they don't have something, that somehow society is not giving them their due. Yeah. And I also think in these movements, there's the cynics and the suckers. There's the cynics who know how to work it, like Michael Flynn and other radio hosts and Alex Jones. They know they're lying, right? There's certain people at Fox that know they're lying, and then there's certain people at Fox News that I don't think know they're lying. I put Brian Kilmeade. The Fox and Friends morning people don't know they're lying. I don't think Sean Hannity knows he's lying.
I've always wondered about this.
Having met and been interviewed by these people, you do get a sense of, this isn't an act. I don't know what's worse. I don't know. They're both. This is, and there's willful ignorance and there's straight hardcore ignorance. But I do think a lot of people seem to judge far more harshly people in entertainment, as if this impacts your life. And maybe it's because it's easier. In the same way that it's easier for Elon Musk and Richard Branson to try and go to space. Try and go to space, than spend time, and NASA, all that time and brain power and money on problems that we could work on here today. Because that might seem harder to get your arms around than this pie in the sky of going to space. Because it's something that can never really be done. It's like constantly, I guess, renovating. Some people have a renovating issue. They want to keep renovating their house. It's indicative of something else. But I do think a lot of this right-wing behavior is indicative of some other problem. And I think when adults retain jealousy and envy, it perhaps is about they think deep down they're not good enough. Somehow they're being victimized or not good enough or not enough.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. I think almost all human suffering is rooted in a fundamental sense of personal inadequacy and insecurity. All emotions arise from the way you interpret the meaning of events that are happening to you with respect to your goals, your wants, and your needs. And so phrases like "a rose by any other name would smell as sweet" really, I think, miss the point entirely, because you can reframe the meaning of something and change the emotional response that you're having to it. And so we call that the appraisal. Like, what's the appraisal you're making of what this means to you? And I started to talk about it earlier, but with respect to jealousy and envy, they're kind of unique. There's a whole class of emotions that are about the way in which you evaluate yourself with respect to others. So embarrassment, shame, guilt are kind of in this same family. Envy, pride, and jealousy are in this same family. And when you experience them, they're about the comparison of yourself to something else. So shame and guilt seem to serve historically this really important function in human society. If you experience them, you're going to be moved back into the norms that the group prescribes for behavior. And the inability to experience shame when you've transgressed the boundaries can be highly problematic. Unfortunately, it happens a lot in politics now, where people engage in behaviors that are shameful and they move outside the bounds. So the other thing I wanted to say about envy and jealousy is that there's almost no neuroscience research on them. Weirdly enough, as important as they are developmentally, as critical as they are in everybody's experience, neuroscience really doesn't study them very much. And I think in part, it's because it's really hard to elicit them in a lab. Like, as a scientist, how am I going to make somebody jealous of something? I can make people frustrated, disgusted, and angry. I can make them sad by recollecting memories. But it's very hard to make people have that experience of jealousy in the moment. I never even thought about that till just now. I think that's actually kind of interesting. But I think it illustrates this really important second step that happens with a lot of our emotions. And like Buddhists would call some of this like the second arrow. Like the first arrow is the emotion itself, but then what do you do to amplify it or take it another direction that increases the suffering? So with envy and jealousy, what's salient to me is this fork in the road where you have to say, okay, they have something that I don't have. Did they get it fairly? Is it good that they have it for them? Can I take their perspective as you have? Like, you're happy for the people who have the beautiful house on Fifth Avenue. Like, wow, that's amazing. They must have a lovely life inside that. Great. Not everybody has that perspective, of course. Some people say, doesn't feel fair that I don't have that. And they do. And that can inspire anger, and that leads to hostility. And there's this distinction made between kind of benign forms of envy and jealousy and malicious forms that lead to the anger and the hostility and the conflict. And part of the problem there, too, is the attachment to the self-concept. We talked about this in the context of actors and acting, where you're attached to a view of yourself as someone maybe worthy of envy, maybe worthy of being someone else's inspiration. And that attachment then leads, if you don't have the status you had, if you're not climbing that ladder, then it reflects poorly on you. Christine Harris at UC San Diego has done surveys of adults across the lifespan to ask, what are people envious of that you have? Like, what kind of things? Like, what is it? And vice versa, what are you envious of in others? And there's a couple of really, I think, interesting patterns. I was reminded of them throughout our conversation tonight. So one is that in general, as you get older, you're less envious of just about everything that somebody else might have, whether it's looks or achievement and so on. But the one thing that goes up a bit, and the age range tops out in the 50 to 60 range. They haven't gone beyond that. It's money. It's income. So that's the one thing that goes up. And I've noticed, it's interesting, but when for 20s, 30s, big, steep, like the slope is higher. Like if that's young and that's old, envy is much higher here than it is here. So maybe that addresses your first question.
But I think actually money, because money
Except
equals
money kind
security.
of kicks back up. Yes.
I think
security and
money
health.
equals
Access to
as you get
healthcare.
older.
It also means being able to take care of your family and the people you care
it means
about. And
so
on.
much as you get older.
Absolutely.
But
yeah.
also, I think what you were saying is with social media and for this generation before, is envy and jealousy now considered an okay thing? I actually don't know if it would be codified as okay, but it seems to be that there's a culture of acquisition. Like whether it be, and I'm not picking on the Kardashian, whatever, they're just being themselves, I guess, I don't know. There's that show, and they have lots of things, and then there's YouTube people who collect things, and then there's YouTube channels of people reacting to other YouTube channels, and there's acquisition. And I always wonder if back in the old day, I'm going, whatever you want to say, during the Depression era or things like that, or World War II and before, when most people seemingly didn't have a lot and didn't have to witness those that did have a lot as much. I mean, there was like the Vanderbilts or the Astors or whatever, but the average person, I think, was just living their life.
Yeah.
And I think it was less likely that people were like, oh, look what they have, or look what they're wearing, or anything. Or if it was almost in a fantasy, aspirational way. Going to the movies didn't suffer during the Depression. And people would love to look at the people living in quote-unquote high society or something.
I think in general, the extent to which you're aware of having an emotional state, when that happens, it does offer an opportunity to reflect on why you're having it, what the origin of it was, whether that emotion feels appropriate to you in that moment or not. And in fact, in a lot of psychotherapeutic techniques, one of the primary goals, it's a kind of a sequence of steps. People come in with their presenting problem. Like, I'm here because such and such is happening in my life. Well, that's what they tell you. But the goal is to kind of work your way backwards to help understand there's probably some kind of emotion that they're experiencing in a certain kind of situation. That emotion has an origin. They're appraising situations in a certain way to produce that emotion. Try to get them to first identify the situation. What's the emotion? Then once that is happening, they can identify it in their everyday life, and then you open up this world of possibilities for what you do next.
But don't you think, maybe you guys feel this way, you can be real reasonable about it, depending on the time of day. Like, I understand this right now. Now I don't feel like understanding it. You know what I mean? You can be quite reasonable. I'm having this emotion. It's unreasonable. I shouldn't feel this way. And then sometimes whatever, the day's not going, whatever has happened, you don't feel like getting underneath. But it seems like most emotions are always about something else. There's always something else at the core of what is presenting, I guess, And sometimes you hate yourself for saying certain things you say, or like in the moment, or thinking, when you're not being as intellectual as you can be. But it usually is always about something else, I think.
It's not so easy. It's not as easy as sort of maybe some fanciful 20th or 19th century notions that you suddenly realize, oh, I have this problem. Catharsis, we're done. Like, today, we're like, that's just the start. That's barely like the first step on some much longer journey.